Hello, this is George from George's Music Blog, and today I'm talking about Ufabulum by Squarepusher. This video is for you if you want to hear a brief summary of Ufabulum, detailed breakdowns of specific tracks, my take on it as a lifelong Squarepusher fan, and some final reflections on where it sits in Tom Jenkinson's discography. You can check out more of my videos on Squarepusher's albums in the description below, but with all that out of the way, let's get into it. Ufabulum marked the start of another new chapter in the Squarepusher discography as he moved away once again from live instruments, which had contributed much to his previous outing, Just a Souvenir, and returned once again to the digital world. It was created with the aid of a bespoke piece of performance and production software, which Tom Jenkinson coded and developed himself, not to mention a new look in the shape of the shiny LED helmet, which he donned for the album cover as well as the accompanying live shows. The result was a shiny new sound and a twinkling monochrome aesthetic, which many people at the time saw as a reaction to or being heavily influenced by the EDM sound, which had become massive at that point. Now, for whatever reason, I didn't really spend a great deal of time with Ufabulum when it came out, so never really formed too many strong opinions, even though I did go and see Squarepusher live as part of the promotional tour, so I must have listened to it at least a few times in preparation for that gig, so that I was familiar with a few of the tracks, but for whatever reason, didn't listen to it a lot. I think 2012, I was more into listening to a lot of techno, minimal techno, so maybe just didn't fancy a new Pusher album at the time, or maybe I've been completely put off by Just a Souvenir, can't remember. Anyway, it is only in subsequent years that I've become more familiar with it, though even now it is not an album I can say that I know back to front like I do many of his records. I do remember the reaction at the time was that Squarepusher had gone EDM or was parodying the Brostep sound of overly exaggerated drops, plasticky synths, and exaggerated bass whomp. Obviously, I avoid anything that could be described as Brostep, but some of it did filter through. So while I can see why the comparison was made, listening to it now, long after that zeitgeist has died away, it feels like a little bit of a tenuous link. I'm not saying Tom Jenkinson wasn't influenced by contemporary producers, or maybe wanted to have a little jab at EDM artists, much like he did with UK Garage on My Red Hot Car 10 years before, but I don't think it's the most helpful context in which to view Ufabulum. And despite the aesthetic change away from the bright colours of Hello Everything and the overly zany Just a Souvenir, at the end of the day, it's still archetypal Squarepusher. Screwball jazzy melodies that stay just the acceptable side of wacky, bass lines that ride and twist like barely controlled beasts, and dizzying feats of rhythmic complexity and technical wizardry. Yeah, he gave his sound a bit of a glow up so that everything lives in this kind of 8-bit LED Tron style world, but at the end of the day, I'd argue it's the same Squarepusher we know and love. Now let's get into the details, and Ufabulum is very much an album of two halves. The first half is lighter, it's more accessible with more straightforward song structures and tracks that have more of a focus on melody. The second half is darker, harder, and more impenetrable, with tracks that make you work a lot more hard for the payoff, but I would argue is a fuller execution of the sound that Tom was going for on Ufabulum. Kicking things off then with the opening track, 4001, that lays out the manifesto for Ufabulum pretty well, with a robotic sounding beat that builds to what you might be tempted to call a euphoric breakdown. Glistening synths then pave the way for a triumphant chorus. There is more than a hint of trance about the production, which is possibly where some of the EDM comparisons come in. Just in the treatment of the synths, though, rather than the physical sensation of the music, the beat is very much Squarepusher, fidgety, restless, and well north of 160 BPM. Then at 3 minutes 12, we get treated to a little bass solo, just to make sure we know we're definitely listening to Squarepusher, although I think it is completely synth-based rather than played on his usual bass guitar. The track deconstructs in the second half in typical Squarepusher fashion, his machines seemingly turning against him and strafing the studio with laser beam fire. Up next, Unreal Square, and Tom lays down a jokingly basic sounding chip tune riff and barreling snare and bass whomp, which again, probably responsible for quite a few of the EDM comparisons. In a tone that sounds like a relic from a mobile phone ringtone circa 2001, Tom lays down an obnoxiously simple riff. Again, this gives way to soaring synth pads that reach for the energy of trance or old school rave music, minus the ecstatic euphoria. Partway through the track, Tom seemingly accidentally steps on the fast forward button, transforming the track into Super Mario on speed, or some other predictable analogy. Once again, during the final stage, the track tears itself apart as aggressive bleeps, bloops, and blasts of noise overpower the mix. The following pair of tracks, Stadium Ice and Energy Wizard, take the energy down a notch or two slightly and repurpose some of the tweeners found on Just a Souvenir. Both contain extremely pleasing tactile sounds and robo-synth noises, think Squarepusher plays Daft Punk, and feature a strong computer game soundtrack aesthetic. I've talked before about Squarepusher's penchant for cosmic melodies. That, combined with the nostalgic video game vibes and the synth pop chords, especially on Energy Wizard, make these feel like the soundtrack to Jenkinson's Cosmic Journeyman finally returning to Earth after a long stint battling aliens in some galactic archipelago. Ufabulum is bifurcated by red and blue, a somber passage of heavy synth chords and drawn-out organ notes. It doesn't resemble much in the Pusher catalogue to date, except maybe Orient Orange off Hello Everything, and is certainly far more fully formed than any of the synth noodling on Music Has Rotted One Note. A handy palette cleanser before the second half of the album, and it further embeds the latent sci-fi atmosphere of Ufabulum. But sci-fi turns to horror on the Metallurgist, where Tom finally unleashes the dark side of his Ufabulum setup. With endlessly rising horror movie strings casting an uneasy backdrop as a squelching acid bassline comes to life to battle against bolts of laser beams. I feel the Metallurgist could tell a story of an ambitious inventor who unwittingly unleashed forces of chaos and malevolence into the world in his quest to create a mechanical minion which then turned on his creator. But all this is just prelude as Ufabulum raises the stakes again with the brooding and foreboding Drax 2. Tom returned to this kind of sound again recently on Dostro Time. Tracks like June Ray, Akronen, and Domelash. Again, like something from a sci-fi horror movie soundtrack, the track builds to a crushing climax. I feel like tracks like the Metallurgist and Drax 2 maybe lack a lot of what lots of fans dig about Squarepusher, or dug at the time. Jazzy melodies, funky rhythms, and that sense of screwball fun, which is maybe why Ufabulum wasn't so well received at the time. If I'm right that it wasn't well received. Was it well received? Did you receive it well? Anyway, after that hard stint, honestly, listening to the final portion of Drax 2 on decent equipment feels, if nothing else, like you've absorbed a shit ton of data. Tom finally gives us something a little bit more propulsive in the shape of dark steering. Judging by the number of streams, it must be the most popular cut on Ufabulum, and in the elasticated bass and skank-inducing rhythm of the opening segment, again, you can hear a little bit of a Skrillex comparison. As the title not so subtly suggests, it is a piece to evoke the feeling of driving, although I would hesitate to encourage listening to it while in control of a motor vehicle. Final reflections. The more I've listened to Ufabulum in recent years, the more sympathetic I've become to it. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, as I always assumed it was a somewhat unpopular left field step for Squarepusher at the time, but maybe many fans have come to the same realization that I have. When you think that it came out after the, let's be honest, deeply flawed Just a Souvenir, and before that the compendium-style highlights box of Hello Everything, it feels like a bold, ambitious, and damn well executed step forward. You have to admire the artistic bravery in putting aside the comforts of his beloved bass guitar and familiar breakbeat. Yeah, I can understand why some die-hard Squarepusher fans might have been turned off by the shiny new sound, and yeah, there is a palpable hint of EDM about the production. But listening to it now, long after that zeitgeist has died away, it is easy to hear the hallmarks of classic Squarepusher. I had always rated Damage and Furies higher, and just found that an album that was easier to get along with for me. But now I'd say they're pretty much even, and I would happily peg both of them as very solid mid-tier Squarepusher albums. Anyway, I'd love to hear your opinion. Please let me know in the comments. If you're still watching the video at this point, please give it a like, and please check out my channel for more of the same. Until next time, thanks for watching. Goodbye.